Welcome back to Twists and Truths, real emotions, real betrayals, real redemption. Some stories don't begin with love, they begin with illusion. For Laura Carter, love wasn't what died. Truth did. When her husband vanished in a fiery crash, the world pitied the young widow. But 20 years later, while sipping coffee on a quiet morning, she turned on the television and saw his face, alive, smiling, and married to someone else. This is the story of a husband who faked his death. 20 years later, I saw him on TV. Laura Carter had always believed that love, when pure, could survive anything, distance, hardship, even death. In the early days, Daniel wasn't just her husband. He was her best friend, her greatest confidant, the man who made ordinary days shimmer. They had built a simple but joyful life together in the quiet town of Redwood Falls. Daniel worked as a contractor, restoring old houses. Laura taught art at the local community center. Their home smelled of coffee and cedar. Sunday mornings meant jazz records spinning on an old turntable while Laura painted in the light that poured through their bay window. Daniel would lean in the doorway, coffee in hand, teasing. If you ever painted me that way, you'd sell the piece in a heartbeat. She'd smile. You're unpaintable, Daniel Carter. No canvas could hold all that trouble. They laughed easily back then. They had dreams of traveling, of adopting a child, of growing old side by side. The kind of promises couples make when life still feels endless. But on a gray Thursday morning in April, everything changed. Daniel left for a renovation project out of town, a 2-week contract at a lakeside cabin, and never came home. At first, Laura wasn't worried. He had a habit of losing track of time, of throwing himself into his work. But after the second week passed, unease began to coil in her stomach. Calls went unanswered, messages delivered but never read. Then the phone rang. A voice, shaky, official, told her Daniel's truck had been found near the cliffs by Lake Eden. No sign of him. Just a wallet, a ring of keys, and a half-empty thermos of coffee. For hours, Laura refused to believe it. She drove there herself through rain that blurred the world into streaks of silver. When she arrived, yellow police tape fluttered like warning ribbons. The officer's words, likely accident, presumed drowned, broke her open in ways she didn't understand. For weeks, search teams combed the water. They found nothing, no body, no closure, just silence. Nights became endless. Laura sat by the window, the same one where sunlight used to fall on her paints, watching shadows crawl across the floor. Friends brought casseroles and pity. The pastor offered prayers. But what Laura wanted most, Daniel's laugh, his scent, the sound of his boots by the door, never came. In her grief, she painted. Every canvas turned darker, crashing waves, stormy skies, faces half lost in shadows. It was as if her brush could feel what her heart refused to say, that she still felt him near. Then came the letter, a thin white envelope, postmarked 2 weeks after the accident inside. Nothing but a single line, written in Daniel's distinct hurried scrawl. I love you, Elle. Remember that some things aren't what they seem. No return address, no signature. The police dismissed it as old, a letter he must have mailed before his death. But Laura couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel was trying to tell her something. Months turned into years. Laura learned to survive. She sold their house and moved into a small apartment downtown. She stopped painting storm scenes and began teaching children again. Still, there were moments, a song on the radio, the smell of pine after rain that brought him back so vividly she had to sit down and breathe through it. Life moved forward. Grief became memory until 20 years later, Laura was watching a morning news segment about community development projects when the reporter's camera panned across a group of volunteers rebuilding homes in another state. And there he was, Daniel, older, yes, beard flecked with gray, but the same smile, the same slight tilt of the head she'd memorized years ago. He was alive, alive and wearing a wedding band. Her coffee cup shattered in her hand. The sound jolted her back to the present, but the image on the screen burned into her vision. She froze the frame and leaned in. It wasn't just a resemblance, it was him. Daniel Carter. For 20 years, she had mourned a man who hadn't died. Her mind spun. Why? How? Was it another cruel mistake? A twin? An illusion born from longing? Or had Daniel truly faked his death? Left her behind for another life. Either way, the truth had resurfaced, and this time she wasn't going to let it slip away. Laura Carter's story, the one she had buried beneath grief, was about to begin again. Are you still enjoying the story? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. The days following the news broadcast were a blur. Laura barely slept. She replayed the clip hundreds of times, freezing every frame that showed his face. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't wishful thinking. It was Daniel, older, stronger, alive. The station banner at the bottom of the screen read, Habitat Hope Project, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Tulsa. He was less than 6 hours away. Laura sat at her kitchen table that night, surrounded by old photos and the single letter he had mailed after his death. Her heart pounded as she studied the handwriting again. Remember that some things aren't what they seem. It wasn't just a goodbye. It was a clue. She whispered into the empty room. Why, Daniel? Why did you have to vanish when you could have just told me? Her voice cracked mid-sentence. For 20 years, she had been both widow and prisoner of unanswered questions. The next morning, Laura packed a small suitcase. Her hands trembled as she closed the door behind her, not from fear, but from the strange thrill of purpose. For the first time in decades, she felt alive again, even if that life was fueled by betrayal. She drove south, the highway stretching endlessly, her reflection flashing in the rearview mirror like a ghost chasing her past. At the Oklahoma City limits, Laura checked into a roadside inn. The receptionist smiled politely. Visiting family? Laura hesitated. Something like that. She barely slept. The next morning, she found the local community center featured in the same news segment. She dressed carefully, simple blouse, soft makeup, then walked in as if she belonged there. A tall man in a blue volunteer vest passed her. She caught only a glimpse of his side profile, not Daniel's, but the adrenaline in her chest spiked anyway. At the information table, a young woman greeted her. "Hi, are you signing up to help with the housing rebuilds?" Laura's throat felt dry. "Actually, I saw one of your coordinators on TV. Dark hair, gray beard, works with carpentry. I think his name is Daniel Carter." The girl frowned slightly. "Oh, you mean David Carter. He's our site manager. Been here about 15 years, I think." Laura's blood turned cold. David Carter. The name was close enough to be an alias. You're watching Twists and Truths, where every story has a twist and every truth has a cost. That afternoon, she went to the construction site. The sound of hammers echoed through the air. Dust and sunlight mingled. And then she saw him, Daniel, or rather, David. He was laughing with another volunteer, his sleeves rolled up, his hands moving just the way she remembered. Deliberate, steady. A woman walked up behind him, handing him a bottle of water. He kissed her on the cheek. Laura froze. The woman couldn't have been more than 45, youthful, gentle, with a warmth that radiated comfort. She wore a gold necklace shaped like a heart. Laura recognized that necklace instantly. She had bought it for Daniel on their 5th anniversary. Tears welled in her eyes as she stepped back behind a nearby truck. The world spun. 20 years of grief, 20 years of prayers, guilt, and loneliness. And he was here, building houses and living another life. She didn't confront him that day. She couldn't. Not yet. She sat in her car and watched from a distance, clutching the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. Every rational part of her screamed to walk away, but her heart, that stubborn, foolish heart, needed to understand why. That evening, Laura found herself in a diner across from the site. She stirred her coffee without drinking it. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, refilled her cup and smiled. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Laura almost laughed. "Something like that." "Ghosts aren't always gone," the waitress said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sometimes they just change names." The words hit harder than she expected. The next morning, Laura returned to the site earlier than before. She watched from her car as David, gave orders to his crew. His voice was the same, even from a distance. When the woman from before arrived, Laura finally saw the truth she had avoided. There was a teenage girl with her, brown curls, Daniel's jawline, and a smile that mirrored Laura's own. Her stomach clenched. Could it be? She whispered to herself, he didn't just fake his death. He rebuilt a life with her. By the third day, Laura couldn't stand the silence anymore. She waited until his shift ended, then followed him to a quiet park near the site. He sat on a bench, unaware that someone was watching. She walked forward. Her shoes crunched against gravel. He turned slowly, cautiously, and in that instant, 2 decades of distance collapsed. Daniel's face went pale. "Laura," he whispered, as if her name were a wound reopened. Her eyes filled. "So it's true. You're alive." He stood, shaking his head. "You shouldn't be here. You died, Daniel. For 20 years, I mourned you every day, every night, and now I find out you've been living under another name." He looked away. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" she demanded. "Because the last time I checked, people don't accidentally fake their own deaths." Daniel exhaled shakily. "I can't explain it here. Not yet. Please. Tell me something that's real," she said softly, stepping closer. "Because right now, I can't tell if I ever knew you at all." He met her eyes, the same stormy gray she once loved. "You did, Laura. You knew the best parts. I just wasn't man enough to let you see the rest." He walked away, leaving her with the faint scent of cedar and rain, the same scent that used to linger on his shirts. Laura stood there long after he disappeared down the path. She had found him, but the truth, whatever it was, had only just begun to unfold. If you've ever walked through betrayal, you're not alone. What would you do if this happened to you? Tell us in the comments. The air outside the park was thick with humidity and disbelief. Laura sat in her car, trembling hands gripping the steering wheel. She wanted to scream, to drive away, to wake up, but she couldn't. She had lived 2 decades inside a grave Daniel dug with his lies, and now she needed to know why. That night, she drove to the small motel she'd been staying at. Though she didn't remember the ride, her mind replayed every word, every detail. It's not what you think. In her room, she opened her laptop and searched David Carter, Tulsa, Habitat Hope Project. The screen filled with articles and press releases. Local hero leads rebuild efforts for tornado victims. David Carter, founder of HopeWorks Foundation. Each headline felt like another knife twisting deeper. She clicked a photo of him with his arm around the same woman and the teenage girl. A caption read, "David Carter with wife Marianne and daughter Lily celebrating 10 years of HopeWorks." Her breath hitched. Lily? He even gave their daughter, their would have been daughter, a name. Laura pushed away from the desk, pacing the room like a caged animal. She tried to rationalize. Maybe he had to disappear. Maybe it wasn't betrayal, but survival. But then why the kiss? Why the marriage? Why the lie that lasted 20 years? The next morning, she returned to the site, heart hammering in her chest. She parked behind a row of trucks and watched him again. Daniel was laughing, teaching Lily how to measure a plank. His hand brushed hers with fatherly affection. The sight broke her, not in anger this time, but in grief. He had built another life out of the ashes of hers. When he turned to check a beam, she noticed a small scar at the edge of his collarbone. The same scar he'd gotten years ago fixing their porch railing. There was no doubt Laura didn't sleep that night. She stayed up rereading the letter he'd sent after his death. Remember that some things aren't what they seem. Now she began to understand. He wasn't warning her about fate. He was confessing in code. On the fourth day, she did something reckless. She followed him home. It was a modest two-story house at the end of a cul-de-sac. White picket fence, sunflowers along the walk. A wind chime clinked softly in the breeze. She sat in her car across the street. Camera zoomed in, eyes unblinking. Through the window, she saw the rhythm of another family's life, laughter at the dinner table, a girl doing homework, a man who used to be hers, reading bedtime stories. Laura whispered, "You became a ghost who learned how to live again." That evening, as Daniel took out the trash, she stepped from the shadows. He froze when he saw her. "Laura," he whispered, panic flickering across his face. "What are you doing here?" She folded her arms, voice trembling. "I came to finish what you started." Daniel looked around nervously. "Not here. Please, she can't see you." "She? You mean your wife? The one who wears my necklace?" "Lower your voice," he hissed, stepping closer. "Please, you don't understand." "Then help me understand," Laura snapped, "because I've been living in your grave for 20 years. He sighed deeply, glancing toward the house. "I didn't mean for you to find out this way." "Then how were you planning for me to find out?" Daniel rubbed his temples. "It started as a job, a restoration project near Lake Eden, the one I told you about. But there were debts, Laura, people I owed money to, bad people. I thought I could handle it, but when I couldn't pay, they came after me." Laura's heart pounded. "You're telling me this was about money?" "It was about survival," he said. "They threatened you. They said if I didn't disappear, they'd come for you next. So you let me bury an empty coffin," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "I didn't see another way. I left everything behind, started over under a new name. Then I met Marianne. She helped me get clean, rebuild." "Rebuild what?" Laura spat. "Your life, your lies." Daniel's voice broke. "You don't know what it's like living with that kind of guilt. Every night I thought about coming back, but by the time it felt safe, too much time had passed. You deserved peace." "Peace?" Laura laughed bitterly. "Peace is knowing the man you loved didn't just vanish into nothing." Tears blurred her eyes. "You let me rot in grief, Daniel. You let me believe I was a widow." He reached out as if to touch her hand, but she stepped back. "Don't!" For the first time, Daniel looked truly broken. "Laura, I wanted to protect you." "No," she whispered. "You wanted to erase me." Suddenly, the front door opened. Marianne stepped outside, confusion on her face. David? Who's this? Daniel froze. Laura turned. Their eyes met. Laura swallowed hard. I'm no one, just a ghost from his past. Before either could respond, she walked away. Fast, before her body betrayed the shaking inside her. She drove aimlessly for hours, tears blurring the lines of the road. Her phone buzzed, a message, unknown number. Daniel, please don't come back. You're safer not knowing everything. Her breath caught. Not knowing everything. What else could there be? The next day, Laura checked out of the motel and drove towards the state archives. If Daniel thought he could bury truth under a false name, he had forgotten who she was, the woman who once loved him enough to know his patterns better than he did. Hours of research revealed what he'd tried to hide. David Carter's foundation had been funded in part by anonymous donations tied to a corporation dissolved 18 years earlier, the same year Daniel vanished. One donor name appeared repeatedly. Marcus Keene, a known investor tied to money laundering in the late 90s. Laura's mind spun. If Daniel faked his death to escape danger, maybe that danger never left. That night, a knock on her motel door startled her awake. When she peered through the peephole, her stomach dropped. Daniel, please, he said through the door, let me in. It's not safe to talk out here. Against her better judgment, she opened the door. He stepped inside, drenched from rain, eyes full of conflict. You shouldn't have dug into that, he said quietly. They'll know now. They? You mean Marcus Keene? Daniel's eyes widened. Laura, please, you don't understand what you've done. Then make me understand, she pleaded. He swallowed. Keene wasn't just my creditor. He was laundering money through the restoration contracts. When I tried to back out, they threatened to kill me. I faked my death to disappear, but they found me again years later. I've been working under them ever since, even now. Laura stared at him, horrified. So all this, the charity, the marriage, it's built on a lie? His voice cracked. It's the only way to keep everyone alive. Thunder rolled outside. For a long moment, the only sound was rain against the window and the heavy weight of 2 decades collapsing between them. Then Laura whispered, "You chose to survive. I choose to live." She handed him the letter he'd written long ago. Remember that some things aren't what they seem. I finally understand, she said. You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourself. Daniel's face crumbled. Laura, I'm sorry. She nodded slowly. So am I. And with that, she turned and walked into the rain, leaving him standing alone in the doorway, the ghost of his second life staring back at the wreckage of his first. Subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and stir the soul. Morning broke in thin, colorless light, the kind that makes even brave people look pale. Laura packed her suitcase with careful hands, as if neatness could anchor her in a life that had drifted off its moorings. Tulsa had given her answers. It had also given her a new question. How do you walk away from the dead when they insist on being alive? She checked out of the motel, left the key on the counter, and slid into her car. The wipers squeaked across the windshield, 1, 2, like a metronome for decision. She should drive home. She should call a lawyer. She should tell no one and tell everyone. She should burn the letter, the memories, the last 20 years. Instead, she drove back to the community center. Inside, volunteers shuffled papers, signed forms, lifted clipboards like shields. Laura stood there in the doorway, an uninvited memory. On the far side of the room, David, spoke quietly with a man in a dark blazer. Not a volunteer, the posture told her everything. Predatory calm, expensive shoes, eyes that cataloged exits. When Daniel spotted her, the color drained from his face. He shook the man's hand too quickly and crossed the room. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured. "Then stop giving me reasons to be," she said. "Who was that?" "No one," he lied, eyes flicking back. "I used to believe you," she said. "I won't make that mistake again." The man in the blazer turned, letting her see him. Thin smile, scar at the jawline, neat as a ruler. He studied her with the cold interest of a jeweler appraising a stone. Daniel stepped between them. "Marcus, this is an old friend," the man finished smoothly, extending his hand. "Marcus Keene. We're all friends here, aren't we?" Laura didn't take the hand. She let her eyes drop to the cuff where a thread had come loose. Even his flaws were curated. "Friends don't stage funerals," she said. "Sometimes friends do unthinkable things under pressure," Keene replied, smile unwavering. "But I prefer the word partners. We build things, homes, futures." "Lies," she said. "Stories," he corrected softly. "And stories keep the lights on for a lot of grateful people." Daniel's voice thinned. "Marcus!" Keene's gaze didn't leave Laura. "Tulsa is small. People talk. I hear you've been asking questions." He tilted his head. "That's a dangerous hobby." "I taught a course on danger for 20 years," she said. "It was called grief." Keene's smile widened a millimeter. "I like you. You have spine." He finally glanced at Daniel. "Handle this, or I will." Then, to Laura, almost as a kindness, "Go home. The past is a sinkhole. It will swallow you." He left with a nod to the receptionist, who flinched as if the air temperature had dropped. Laura exhaled. "So that's the ghost you kept feeding." Daniel pressed a hand to the back of his neck. "He doesn't bluff." "I don't either," she said. "Tell your partner I won't be buried twice." He swallowed. "Laura, please. If you push this, he'll go after you." "After?" He stopped. "After Marianne and Lily," she finished. "Your new family." Guilt flickered across his face. "They didn't ask for any of this." "Neither did I," she said. "But here we are." She left the center and drove aimlessly, the city unfolding in flat gray sheets. Her phone vibrated with an unknown number. She answered. A woman's voice. "Is this Laura?" "Yes." "I'm Marianne," the voice said carefully. "David's wife." Silence sat down between them like a third person. "How did you get my... I found a note in David's jacket, Marianne said. He wrote your name. He never writes names. Please, could we talk somewhere public? Laura considered hanging up. Instead, she said, where? The cafe smelled like cinnamon and new beginnings. Marianne sat at a corner table, hands around a cup she didn't drink, face bare of makeup, eyes already brimming. She was beautiful in the way earnest people are. No performance, just light. Thank you for coming, Marianne said. I didn't come for him, Laura said. I came for truth. Marianne nodded. I can work with that. For a moment, they simply looked at one another, two women holding opposite ends of the same rope, tugging at a knot tied by a man who wasn't brave enough to stay. I didn't know, Marianne whispered. About you. Not at first. Not for years, she swallowed. He told me his first wife died. Laura felt the floor tilt. He killed me with kindness. He was broken, Marianne said, gentle, terrified. When Lily was born, he wouldn't let us near the windows for months. He said a name in his sleep sometimes, L dash dash. He never finished it. Laura's throat tightened. Laura, Marianne nodded, eyes bright. I thought it was a prayer. They sat in the shared weather of that sentence. Why call me? Laura asked softly. Because a man came to our house last night, Marianne said, tall, scar on his jaw. He said we were all very lucky. Then he looked at Lily's picture and asked how old she was. Her voice trembled. I need to know what we're in. Laura's hands went cold. You're in a story written by a coward and edited by a criminal. Marianne flinched, then lifted her chin. And how does it end? That depends on how much truth we can carry without dropping each other, Laura said. They stared at one another again, this time like allies. Marianne reached into her bag and slid a folder across the table. Receipts, donations, anonymized transfers, a pattern of numbers that looked like a barcode for guilt. David thinks he can outrun this, Marianne said. He can't. Laura turned one page, then another. You kept records. I keep what men drop, Marianne said, not unkindly. Laura nodded. Then we blow it open. Marianne exhaled a shaky laugh. Just like that? Just like that, Laura said, and realized she meant it. They met again that night with a burner phone and a plan. Laura called a journalist from a regional paper who once covered corruption in non-profits. Marianne called an attorney she trusted. They made copies, then copies of copies. They typed statements. They timed their disclosures so nobody could pull a single thread without the whole sweater coming off. Keane would call it betrayal. Laura called it resurrection. At 10:12 p.m., the burner phone rang. Unknown number. Laura put it on speaker. Do you think you're the first widow to mistake vengeance for justice? Keene's voice was silk over wire. You don't frighten me. Good, Laura said. Then you won't mind hearing this on the record. She angled the phone to her laptop. The journalist listened from the other end of a recording session, silent and hungry. Marianne slid another page across the table, routing numbers, matching dates, the paper trail that turns rumor into court dates. Keene chuckled softly. You misunderstand, Miss Carter. I don't lose, I adjust. Adjust to handcuffs, Marianne said, surprising herself. A pause, then the line went dead. The journalist exhaled. Ladies, she said, if half of this sticks, tomorrow is going to be very loud. Make it loud, Laura said. Loud enough to drown a ghost? Keene adjusted quickly. By morning, the center's bank accounts were temporarily frozen. A legal team appeared with injunctions like umbrellas. Daniel was placed on administrative leave. The volunteers came in anyway, bewildered, indignant, faithful to the work if not the men. Daniel called. Laura let it ring 5 times and answered. You're putting a target on your back, he said. And you drew the map, she replied. Meet me. Noon, the park. He hesitated. Marianne. We'll be fine, Laura said. She knows more than you think. Silence crackled over the line. Finally, he said, noon. The park wore a noon sun like a badge. Children shrieked by the swings. A dog chased itself in hopeful circles. Laura sat on the bench where she'd first confronted him days ago. Daniel approached without his vest, without his ring, without his practiced smile. You went to war, he said. I went to work, she corrected. I learned from the best. He took a breath. They won't let this roll off their backs. Keene ... is already on the phone rewriting his alibi, she said. Let him. Laura, he said, voice fraying, I know you think I chose myself. Maybe I did. But I chose you too. I chose to keep you alive. She looked at him a long time. You chose the version of me that couldn't contradict you. He flinched. I loved you, he said. I believe you, she replied, and I forgive you. But forgiveness isn't a hall pass. She slid a manila envelope across the bench. This is my statement. Yours should match mine. Names, dates, the body swap, the accounts. Put your signature at the bottom and go to the journalist today. And if I don't, then you get to keep your second death, she said softly. This time there will be a body. It will be the man you wanted to be. He stared at the envelope as if it were a small, quiet bomb. If I do this, Keene won't stop. Then don't do it alone, a voice said behind him. Marianne, she stepped into sunlight, fear braided to resolve. We stand together or we fall separately. Daniel looked between the two women, past and present, whose lives he'd split like firewood. For a moment he seemed about to run in both directions. Lily? He asked hoarsely. With my sister, Marianne said. Safe. He nodded, a little boy caught at the cookie jar, finally willing to tell the whole story because the kitchen light was on. He picked up the envelope, opened it, read. When he reached the last page, his shoulders dropped. I'll do it, he said. I'll tell everything. Not to me, Laura said. To the truth, he half laughed, half sobbed. You always did know how to end a scene. I teach endings, she said. They make beginnings possible. They walked together, 3 people, with one burden, toward the street where truth waited impatiently. Daniel paused, turned back to the bench, and traced his fingers over the wood as if blessing a headstone. Laura, he said, if I don't come back, you will, she said. But even if you don't, this time I'll bury a man, not a lie. By late afternoon, the first article hit the paper's site. Local foundation tied to laundering network. Whistleblower speaks. Then another. By evening, a regional news van parked outside the center. Volunteers stood in clumps, eyes shining, hurt, folding into relief. Donors called, board members resigned, lawyers reworded sentences in rooms without windows. Keene didn't adjust fast enough. A warrant materialized, a flight record leaked, an associate flipped. By midnight, he was in custody, arrested at a private airstrip with a passport that didn't know his name. At 1:07 a.m., Laura's burner phone pinged a single text from an unknown number. You win today. Careful, teacher. Stories have sequels. Laura set the phone down, steady. So do widows, she whispered. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion settle like clean sheets. For the first time in 2 decades, she slept through the night. Morning sun like honey, the kind of day that sets tables on porches and keeps promises. Laura poured coffee in a real mug and carried it to the window. Her reflection looked older, yes, but there was light behind the eyes again. The light of women who have outlived the storm and learned the language of their own weather. Her phone buzzed. A photo from Marianne, Lily laughing on a couch, a smear of pancake batter across her cheek. The caption read, "Thank you from all of us." Laura typed, then erased, then typed again. Build her a life that doesn't hide. She hit send. The second buzz was from the journalist. He signed, full confession. We go live at noon. Bring a quote. Laura stared at the cursor. Then she wrote, "Tell them this. The dead don't always stay buried. Sometimes they come back so the living can finally rest." She set the phone aside and watched the morning move across the floor. The house breathed with her. Somewhere in the middle distance, sirens rose and fell, busy with other people's endings. She opened her notebook and wrote a title on a blank page, "Widow Waking." Then she turned the page and began chapter 1.